How's it going? Welcome back to another great video with the majestic host, the Savior. Oh yes, that's right. And today I have another quick VR game review. I just thought I would start covering some VR titles, especially ones where I can do kind of a retrospective on the game as well. So it's a win-win to basically look back at older games. Not so much every single VR game because a lot of them are just glorified demos. So today we're going to be taking a look at Bulletstorm VR edition. Okay, so this is my Bulletstorm VR review, and you can also count this as a Bulletstorm retrospective review because this game has basically gone under the radar for way too long, okay? And finally, Bulletstorm VR might bring it back. So if you are new to the channel, consider subscribing. It only takes 2 seconds of your time. Just go down below and subscribe. It would mean so much to me because I work so hard on all of my content. I'm really passionate about the community that we're building here. If you want to become a wise one, join the channel. Don't be like the rest. Don't be the 90% of dum-dums. Be the true 1% and become a wise one. Join this fantastic community. If you like early game coverage, early reviews, retrospective, deep video essays on gaming, or my more dystopian / philosophical video essay series, then you will find something you enjoy on this channel. So do subscribe and consider supporting me by becoming a member or simply checking out the music that I make on Spotify if you like that type of cyberpunk style synth music. VR, pretty much the platform to bring back dead games and give them a new lease on life. So for that reason, VR isn't necessarily as bad as I thought it was. I'm not a huge fan of VR, mostly the technology, as it can be used for dystopian, nefarious reasons, which I've talked about before in many other videos. But for gaming, of course, it's a blast, but I do feel like VR has been lacking some serious, proper game titles, okay, some full games that you can actually play all the way through. There are some that do exist that do support, you know, actual modern games like No Man's Sky, but VR is also good for bringing back older titles because of the, you know, graphical limitations of VR, especially with the Meta Quest. Not so much the new PlayStation 5 VR or PC VR, but a lot of people don't want to be tethered, okay? They want that freedom. So that's why the Meta Quest is the most selling VR at the moment. And PC VR is a very niche thing, and it's only for people who have a hell of a lot of money, usually, if you want the best of the best. So usually graphics and just the limitations of VR are basically catered towards the Meta Quest market, okay? So that means a lot of games end up being rather poorly optimized, or graphically they're not that great, but it is also a positive to some degree because it means we can play some of the best older games, because let's face it, most of the games that are good are from the past. We don't get many new good titles. They do exist, like Baldur's Gate 3 and you know, trying to think of other ones. In the early 2000s, the early noughties to, I would say, like 2016, 2018 even, that was prime time gaming. That's when we were getting interesting ideas. Developers still gave a shit. They weren't all just, you know, focused around market shares and profit and how to juice the consumer as much as they possibly could. They were still focused on bringing unique creative experiences. They weren't, you know, kind of limited with their freedom of expression as well. Back when games took more risks, you know, that's when we got great games like Spec Ops: The Line, the original Borderlands before it went all PC and wokeified, sadly. So I will give you a quick review of Bulletstorm, a quick retrospective of Bulletstorm, and then I will quickly talk about the VR aspects in Bulletstorm and give you the Bulletstorm VR review. But bear in mind, I've only played like the kind of tech demo, I haven't played the full release, and from what I have seen, they haven't implemented VR as well as they could have, which is a little bit of a shame. So Bulletstorm was back when, you know, we were getting good quality games, back when shooters were shooters, we had, you know, full story campaigns, and it was pretty much a callback to the earlier games like Duke Nukem, back when main characters had some toxic masculinity traits and they were just shooting one-liners 24/7, back when games were games and they were just focused on having fun. A lot of the games took inspiration from Bulletstorm, like Borderlands and stuff like that. The best games to compare it to nowadays, I would say, are the new Doom games, because it plays very fast-paced, it rewards these cool cinematic kind of gory kills that you do yourself. It's not, an animation, which is very satisfying. So basically you have this boot, and when you kick an enemy, they're going to go into stasis mode, kind of like in Dead Space, and then you can do some pretty cool stuff like, whack them into like a spike. You can tear apart the enemies with your bullets, and it's very satisfying, very gory, and it's just over the top, kind of cheesy B-movie type story fun. And that's why everyone loved this game. It just rewarded, creative, fast-paced, skilled gameplay, which we don't get much of anymore, because now it's more cinematic and, it's going to be a cutscene, then gameplay, then some more cutscenes, and then we're going to tell you exactly what to do and exactly how to play the game. No, this just let you go balls to the walls. And to this day, it feels like a lot of people feel that Bulletstorm was overlooked, even back then in 2011. This game came out in 2011, so it is quite an old title now, but it holds up surprisingly well, and of course it never did well enough to, warrant a sequel, which is a shame. And now let's talk about Bulletstorm VR Edition, okay? So I don't think they implemented it as well as they could have, because again, you are just floating arms, and the weird thing is you can still kick in this game, especially in VR, because it's a very important mechanic in Bulletstorm, but because you're just floating arms, you're also just like this weird floating leg that just is disconnected from your body when you, put an enemy into stasis, which feels very weird. Also, fast-paced shooters in VR usually just don't feel right, okay? The Doom VR Edition just didn't feel right. VR is much more suited to slower, methodical gameplay, like, tactical sim shooters. It just feels more immersive, and it just plays much more immersive because, you're taking cover, you're using the VR environment, zapping around like a madman just makes you feel disconnected. And also for people who do suffer from motion sickness, I don't, and I'd like to go full crazy like in games like Boneworks, but for those who do suffer from motion sickness, this will just make you barf, okay? But because it has been limited by the Meta Quest, I just feel like they could have really made this like the sequel that everyone wanted, instead of just kind of like a VR rip. The only new content that you actually get in this is there are some extra levels where you basically play as the female protagonist. The reward system that you get for playing like a madman and, kind of getting these combo kills and all that stuff, that's still all very much intact, and it does feel very video gamey in all the best possible sense. Something like Resident Evil 4 on the Meta Quest, that was such a perfect blend because it really adds to the slower gameplay, but it utilizes actually being in the physical environment. Something like Bulletstorm, I feel like it's just a little bit of a weird pick. If you've never played Bulletstorm before and you want just like a fun game that reminds you of the earlier Borderlands where the story isn't taking itself too seriously, the gameplay is just fun, that's all that matters, and you've got a full campaign to go through, then I basically recommend this. And in VR, it is still a good time, and it does add new content. And of course, being in the world, seeing all the buildings and stuff like that, it is immersive, but I just feel like it's just a little bit of a strange title to add into VR, but there you go. So I do think it is worth it, and if you are a fan of VR, then it is probably worth it. But again, they're just price hiking a very old title with some very, small amounts of new content added. Also, the whole point of VR is being able to interact with the world around you. For me, that's what's good about VR, is when things are actually, physical, you can move them, they have game physics in them. That's when VR is at its best. But this very much feels like a port of a game into VR, but it doesn't feel like a VR title, okay? And to me, that is just a shame, and this is what's holding VR back, in my opinion. But there you go, that's just a quick review of Bulletstorm VR and a quick retrospective of Bulletstorm. I do feel like this game deserved a lot more love. Some of the gameplay that they had here in the combat, particularly, they could have really developed more into other games. But of course, experimental titles usually get left behind in the gaming industry, and it's just the sad state of things. And that's why you need to look at smaller games to find the real gems. But there you go, I do hope you enjoyed this one. It was a very quick review. But I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day. Peace out.